Good afternoon, Dr. St. Clair and class. Lauren Cassette again, and for this presentation, I'll be going over the 10 lenses for adult belief systems, specifically the Transcendent Lens, as we move forward and talk about that. When we talk about the Transcendent Lens, first, kind of just a quick quote that I found when I was kind of researching through this and looking things up. The authentic self is the soul made visible. And I really thought, based on what we're going to be discussing and going over, within the Transcendent Lens, that really fit, because I feel like a lot of times people operating from this lens are really trying to look for the authentic self in another person and their authentic self. And that's the type of connection they're looking for, what they want, and how they try and really perceive the world and the interactions with people they have in it. As we talk about the Transcendent Lens, we talk about the archetype and the profile, the strengths, the shadows, the lens at work. Then for me, as I moved through my program, it was important for me to really try and label this in with things that I study and what my kind of passion areas are, that being leadership. So really looking at the Transcendent Lens in leadership, and then looking at the Transcendent Lens in the larger United States culture, and how that all comes together. So when I think about the archetype, I think of this quote from the current president, Joe Biden: "Come on, man, we're better than this." And to me, that reflects an alignment to higher values or beliefs, or more core values that connect us all. As he's making those comments, are really trying in his mind to pull a nation and a society or culture really back together and remind us of those higher values and beliefs. For the Transcendent Lens, part of the archetype is really seeking this universal identity as humans and a divine interconnectedness with all things. So we're moving past ethnicity, past race, past culture, past the things that really typically people look at for conflict or divisive, or what makes us different. We're really talking about what makes us the same and similar, and that being our universal identity as a human. The Transcendent Lens uh, tend to respect all races and cultures, and it's through that context of connectedness where my respect is I'm respecting you as a human, not based on a race or ethnicity or your belief pattern. I want to be connected with you, and so therefore I want to respect all races and cultures. Really, two categories of the Transcendent Lens: that's religious and spiritual. This religious category, they really look as God assigning positions and roles in life and experiences in life for the individual to help actualize their humanity within themselves and the humanity of those around them. The spiritual category is kind of similar, but we're taking the God out of it, and we're really looking at the body as a vehicle or a vessel for reaching a higher level attainment. Think like a Gandhi or a perception like that, where the body is just serving as that vehicle or vessel as we progress through life and we move through life to really connect and to actualize ourselves and to help actualize those around us. The Transcendent Lens tends to focus on, like we said, what connects and what ties people together. And their mission overall is really to fulfill that higher purpose that can be either religious or spiritual. And once again, I thought when I think of Joe Biden, and he is a devout Catholic, and just that alignment to higher values and beliefs of, really understanding that we are better than this, and trying to find that universal identity within the context of American culture and society. The Transcendent Lens has many strengths and shadows. For their strengths, they do model tolerance. Their focus is on the opportunities of today and tomorrow, versus really trying to reflect and look on past grievances. Uh, Almost from maybe a psychological or a counseling perspective, uh, appreciative inquiry, where people tend to focus on the positives and the benefits and hoping that helps them outgrow the negatives, where this is kind of very similar to that, in terms of by focusing on today and our opportunities tomorrow, we can really move past and not really have to discuss those past grievances. And by doing that, they represent forgiveness of the past and of those conflicts from the past, almost a very automatic forgiveness for those past grievances. By the way they operate in this connection that they're seeking, they do help heal individuals and they do help heal relationships. So you could see these people really trying to move past the cultural differences, say societally what we face right now, or politically divisions based on values. The people that are transcendent are really trying to move past those and really trying to bring us back together and unite us at our core, at our humanity, and what connects us. They serve as reminders of deep connections, whether spiritually, religiously, or just interconnectively to each other and one another. And they're more focused on a global community. They're not going to be looking regional or city or specific into themselves, or this is my group. Rather, the entire world is a global community and it's all their group. So these are some great strengths, but with the shadow aspect, it kind of mirrors these strengths, that as they're very willing to move past and forget about past grievances, they can be impatient and dismissive if they feel like people are stuck in those past grievances, almost a get over it, we're not there anymore. If we keep focusing on the past, we're never going to grow, we're never going to become what we're meant to be and actualize ourselves because we're too focused on the past. Because of that, they are sometimes unable or unwilling to recognize the oppression or injustices that it still exists. And so maybe that's almost giving a too positive a spin, or only focusing too much on the positive and not really recognizing that, hey, there might be systemic injustice that exists and that does need to be addressed. They do struggle to address and help work through long-standing differences. And that goes back to kind of what we've already mentioned, where they're looking at today and looking to tomorrow, very hopeful, very optimistic, very interconnected with that. And because of that, it's hard for them to be in the here and now and deal with the past and those conflicts that are long-standing and that are generational and that haven't been worked all the way through. They will struggle to address those at times and moved on. And the link concept I had there, kind of like I mentioned, is appreciative inquiry, where some therapists or leaders, because they're for, say, appreciative leadership, will look to help people focus on their strengths and what they do great and concentrate on doing those. And by doing that, they believe that eventually some of the negative habits or behaviors or thought patterns disappear due to that focus on the positive and focusing on, what this person or this team or this group is really good at. At work, the Transcendent Lens is seeking meaningful contribution to their organization, and they prefer to be in an organization that is socially responsible, that they do see as that connection to a higher calling that is making a difference in the world. During my times in the Middle East, a phrase that I heard frequently was inshallah, and the way I understood that was God willing, or if God wills it. And kind of very similar to that, a Transcendent Lens believes that the divine will place me where I need to be and where I need to be there. So therefore, they're not very big on promotions or trying to climb the ladder, almost like inshallah, God willing, if God wills me to be promoted or that's where I need to serve, that's where I'll end up being placed. And so they hand that over. They look for a big cultural fit in organizations and in organizational politics. So when they're there, they're really trying to bring it together, and fit is very important to them. But because of how important fit is for them, it can make it kind of challenging to have the right fit, because they are going to miss some of those grievances or injustices as they're trying to align to a higher purpose. For a Transcendent Lens, should they ever be completely in charge, what would you expect? And kind of what I took away from the reading would be almost a complete overhaul of systems from their perspective, moving towards an almost entirely values-based alignment. So the fit and values are going to come above actual technical skills, competence, or abilities to actually get a job done. They're going to be much more reliant on, do our values align, and are you going to be a good fit for how I perceive a fit to be? As a leader or a manager, they may miss discrimination and those injustices that go around because they're so focused on the positive moving forward and people being connected that sometimes it's hard for them to recognize that those issues still do exist and that they're ongoing around them. Because of their same way of looking at the world, they can struggle delivering negative feedback, especially if it's someone that they feel that they share values with or they share a good cultural fit with. It makes it that much more difficult for them to deliver that negative feedback. And based on all of this, they can come across as being inconsistent and potentially having a bias towards people they share values with, and really not connecting or being around with people they don't necessarily have that fit with. So from that, how they work and how that can be perceived, I try to look at this through the lens of transformational leadership, how a transcendent lens might come across as a leader. And so within transformational leadership, of the full range leadership model, you have what are called the 4 I's. And that's idealized influence, individualized consideration, intellectual stimulation, and inspirational motivation. And really kind of the qualities that we look for if you're looking for somebody that's going to be a very strong transformational leader. So idealized influence, really what that comes down to is being a great role model. So a transcendent lens leader will role model inclusive behaviors and demonstrate openness and welcomeness at the human level. However, kind of the shadow part to that is role modeling behaviors that can overlook grievances or experience of other groups can ultimately erode morale and trust in that leader. So it becomes a very much in-group versus out-group if they're not paying attention to how they're interacting and how they're operating in the position as a leader. The individualized consideration, typically what that means is seeing an individual for who they are and recognizing that each person is different and treating each person as an individual. So a potential pitfall for a transcendent lens leader is that those, relying primarily on the transcendent lens may inadvertently overlook individual needs and concerns of a member because they are looking for that global community, that global connection, that it's a little bit higher level, that sometimes we're missing that individual one-on-one and recognizing some of those injustices or patterns that are going on. A strong view that we are all aligned or the same at our core doesn't necessarily recognize the individual nature of humans, especially in individualistic cultures like the United States. So we want that individual consideration, and sometimes that global lens or a transcendent lens can really pull away from that a little bit. Intellectual stimulation is how I, as a leader in that position, challenge or empower or try and get people to think outside of the box or become creative solutions or really push them to think about things differently and give great information. So I would say that a transcendent lens from that intellectual stimulation kind of viewpoint can excel at challenging and stimulating the minds of their team members and how task goals and long-term objectives align with the organizational values. So they're really coming from a values-based perspective. And I think putting that together with why we're doing this, what value does this align to of our organizational culture or what we're trying to do, could be very powerful, but it could also alienate team members who are just more focused on getting the job done. That I don't necessarily care about the values, I don't care about the mission. I'm just one of those workers. I'm head down on a keyboard. I'm going to do my job. I'm going to give you what I can, and I want to go home at the end of the day. And so they may not necessarily appreciate that as much as some other employees would. And finally, the inspirational motivation. So I feel like a transcendent lens, when you're operating from that lens, really may help a leader inspire their teams by speaking to foundational core values that really tie the team together that we all share and focusing on that humanity and that bigger picture. I think in the proper context, a strong tie to a higher purpose or calling can strongly influence people. And I think a great example of this is the military, where you do have to put a lot of that to the side and you do have to be aligned to a higher calling. And definitely you want that willingness to serve something greater than you. And I do think a transcendent lens can help bring those feelings about and really make that connections for people that this leader would be responsible for. So within the context of the United States, when I mentioned, the individualized consideration, how the United States is a very individualistic culture, that sometimes a transcendent lens might miss that and not give that proper individual consideration. I think when you look at the transcendent lens, just in the overall context of the United States, you can really kind of see based on Hofstede's model how this could type to look. So I would say for indulgence, obviously United States scores a little bit higher here for our cultural score. I would say that a transcendent lens would probably be significantly lower on the indulgence, where they're more so looking for that connection. So they would be much lower on that. In terms of long-term orientation, I feel like a transcendent lens would probably score higher than the typical average United States score of being 26 overall, just because for me that connection to a divine or to a spiritual entity, into a higher calling, into connectedness, definitely speaks to a longer-term orientation versus kind of the here and now. In terms of uncertainty avoidance, I do think that belief in a spiritual world or the values-based and religious, especially if it's religious-based and you're aligning to that starts limiting that uncertainty avoidance and kind of brings that a little bit down, because I think they may feel, based on their beliefs, a little bit more certain about what happens in this life or maybe in the afterlife. That puts that down. Masculinity-wise, I would see the transcendent lens based on the words that I use to describe it and the words that we've read in the text and just in the research. I would see them lower than 62 in masculinity. I would say they were probably more so on the femininity side of the scale, and more terms of caring and approachable and empowering and bringing together versus the assertive, more dominant nature. The individualism, I think the transcendent ledge is going to be definitely a lot lower than that 91 as they look for that group collection as it all comes together. And I would say power distance would be pretty spot on, if not maybe a little bit lower for power distance for the transcendent lens, because when you're seeking that connection and you're looking for that human, what brings us all together, I think you're really going down to a base level, and you're really saying that there's not really a power distance difference, that at our core, we're all humans, and that's what identifies us, so we're the same. So I would definitely probably see this power distance score being much lower for somebody with a transcendent lens. Overall, as we talked about the transcendent lens, we talked about the archetype, the profile, the strength, the shadows, the lens at work, the lens in leadership, and the lens in the larger United States culture. And have my picture back here, because I think when I went through this, that overall I felt like Joe Biden was a great example. I wouldn't say that he operates primarily out of this lens, but I think that there is some connection with this lens that he relies on or does leverage at certain times as he's moving through because at the end of the day, none of us operate solely or primarily with only one lens. We definitely move back and forth. Do we have a primary one we operate out of? Most likely, yes. But I think to grow and to become more aware and to be a better just human in the world, or a leader, or in our case, eventually as a doctor, you need to understand the different lenses, and you need to, in some ways, know how to sometimes leverage them in different ways yourself. And I think that's really what Joe Biden does, but some of the comments he's made and his actions really speak to that transcendent lens. My discussion question for this will be, based on your educational program, what are some examples of educators and or leaders that you've seen leverage this lens, and how do they really leverage it to make themselves successful? Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.